the steam engine, electricity, the telephone. There have been many inventions throughout history that have both fascinated and surprised the public. Of course, all of these things are completely normal now, but there was once a time when they were a new and shocking idea, something that people might even be afraid of. In the mid to late 1800s, one of the most highly debated of these new ideas was the bicycle, and specifically, the women who chose to ride them. So join me, dear viewers, as today we discuss the bicycle craze of the 1890s, the new age of freedom that it brought for women, and the moral panic that came along with it. Like most of the famous inventions that arose during the 19th century, the bicycle would undergo many iterations before it reached the design that we're familiar with today. The first bicycles, known as Laufmaschine, or running machines, came along in the late 1810s, and didn't even have pedals. They would instead be controlled by how fast your legs could move across the ground, reaching terrifying speeds of up to 16 kilometers, or just 10 miles per hour. Later on, there was the velocipede model in the 1860s, which was nicknamed the Bone Shaker, due to the fact that it was very heavy, had tires made of wood and iron, and would quite literally rattle your bones as you rode along. It also didn't have any brakes, which made for a very uncomfortable and dangerous ride. Next came the high wheel or penny farthing bicycle, which was popular in the 1870s. These models featured a large front wheel and solid rubber tires, which allowed the bicycle to travel at high speeds. But its height and the lack of shock absorption still made it difficult to ride. And of course, there were all kinds of strange multi-wheeled designs that tried and failed to become mainstream, like the quadricycle. But there was one thing that all of these machines had in common. They were made for men. Cycling was seen as a sport after all, which was a masculine pastime. Men would form cycling clubs complete with uniforms where they would ride around and race each other, but women were not welcome in these spaces. Though there were some forward-thinking women that did make the attempt, models like the velocipede and high-wheel bicycle were particularly difficult for them to ride, since the shape of the frame and the placement of the pedals didn't account for the bulky hoop skirts that were fashionable at the time. And cycling was dangerous. Roads weren't paved and no one was wearing helmets, not to mention the risk of a woman getting her skirt caught in the wheels. No, in the case that a woman wanted to ride one of these machines, she should stick to doing it with her husband, either riding with him on a tricycle or side saddle on a tandem bike, while he did all of the hard work of pedaling and steering. Or at least that's what many men believed. But the 1880s would bring forth a new type of bicycle that sought to correct many of these issues. This model featured wheels of the same size, a diamond-shaped frame, brakes, and inflatable tires to make a smoother and more comfortable ride. It was known as the safety bicycle, and would change the overall perception of cycling from being something that was exclusively for daring young men to an effective mode of transportation that was accessible for everyone. These bikes even came in a special model just for women that had a lower drop frame and guards along the wheels so that they could be better ridden while wearing a skirt. And as the first women got their hands on these new safety bicycles, they were about to enter an entirely new world. For much of history, women have been very limited when it comes to means in which they could maintain an active lifestyle. Starting around the Middle Ages, there was a long portion of time where a woman's place increasingly became inside the home. As society and technology advanced, there was less of a need for women to participate in outdoor work like farming, and more of an emphasis on them remaining indoors and caring for children and the household. Cumbersome clothing and strict social rules also made it so that women had limited options when it came to exercise. Of course, there were socially acceptable activities, like walking, riding, or dancing, but these were all done in moderation, and in strict environments where they were heavily monitored. This meant that women, especially from middle or upper-class families, faced a lot of physical and mental health issues that came with an isolated life indoors. This was only made worse by the attitudes that were prevalent at the time. Women were seen as the weaker sex in more ways than one. It was generally accepted by the medical community that a woman only had a limited amount of energy, and too much excitement or strenuous physical activity could severely impact her ability to reproduce. The invention of the safety bicycle, however, suddenly gave women more independence than they ever had before. By riding her bike, a woman could now leave the house whenever she wanted, being able to travel farther and faster than she could by walking. Now she could go to the store, meet up with friends, or explore the countryside. And for once, she didn't need a man to take her there. Best of all, she was able to get away from the stifling environment of the home in favor of fresh air and exercise, both of which greatly helped the mental health issues that were quickly becoming a crisis for women at the time. I think that this quote from an 1896 issue of Munsey's magazine says it best. To men, the bicycle in the beginning was merely a new toy, another machine added to the long list of devices that they knew in their work and play. To women, it was a steed upon which they rode into the new world. And ride into the new world they did. As cycling became more popular, soon it wasn't just the new world that caught people's attention, but rather the new woman. As the popularity of the safety bicycle exploded, so too did the number of women who took up cycling as a hobby. Publications like The Lady Cyclist provided all kinds of resources for women who wanted to get into the sport, publishing articles that taught them the basics of cycling, how to repair their bicycle, and gave all kinds of tips and tricks for their cycling endeavors. With the sport being new territory for women, and much of the public uncomfortable with the idea, there was a lot of emphasis in the female cycling community to maintain a certain level of dignity when riding their bicycles. Early adopters of the sport had a careful part to play, where they would have to act as a representation of cycling as a whole in order to maintain the fragile respect that they had worked so hard to achieve. Many articles in The Lady Cyclist stressed that a woman should only be cycling out in public once she was practiced in her riding skills, and was able to give off an air of confidence and dignity. The popularity of cycling amongst women would open all kinds of new doors for them. Not only was it a great tool for leisure and transportation, but it also gave more forward-thinking individuals options for how they wanted to live their lives. The bicycle could help you get to a job, for example, or to the shock of many, even a suffragette meeting. This was an era for a new kind of woman, one who was thinking and moving independently. It wasn't long before the bicycle itself became a symbol of women's rights as a whole. The rational dress movement in particular would be massively influenced by cycling. This movement surrounded the idea of providing women with clothing that was both comfortable and practical for everyday life, something that many fashions throughout the 19th century were not. This was especially important to ensure that women could cycle comfortably and safely. Long skirts and structured undergarments like a crinoline weren't very practical for riding a bicycle after all, and they were constantly in danger of getting caught in the mechanisms or flying up in the wind. As a result, many versions of ladies' cycle wear would be patented and sold to the public, all of which used the principles of rational dress as a guideline. One major change that many lady cyclists would make was replacing their skirts with bloomers or knickerbockers, two choices that were sure to cause a stir in public. Others would try out one of the many convertible clothing options that were intended for cycling, like skirts that could be gathered up with cords, pulley systems, or buttons in order to switch between outfits. There was also a sports corset, which was specifically designed with elastic in order to be comfortable while exercising. Cycling had truly brought forth an age of endless possibility, but like any new idea, there were some that were not so keen on these so-called new women. Among many members of the upper and middle classes, cycling was both a fashionable and respectable hobby. At least, it was if you were a man. A woman on a bicycle, however, was another thing entirely. What was she doing participating in such a manly and dangerous sport, the men wondered. Where was she going? Why was she wearing such inappropriate clothing? And by God, was she straddling that bicycle? The year is 1890. The only thing a woman should be straddling is her husband. Needless to say, the increasing number of women cycling began to incite moral panic amongst Victorian society. There were many reports of female cyclists being harassed in public. People would yell insults at them, or throw rocks to try and make them lose balance and fall. And this was especially prevalent if she was wearing rational dress or cycle wear. Those who were against female cyclists usually fell into one of three categories. Firstly, a woman on a bicycle was not following her proper role in society. She was supposed to be fragile and soft, staying in the home and raising her children, not gallivanting around the countryside, wearing trousers and attending suffragette meetings. There were concerns that these so-called lady cyclists sought to abandon their role as women entirely. Many of these fears can be seen in some of the political comics that circulated at the time, featuring the quote-unquote new woman smoking cigars and playing cards, while her poor husband was left to mind the children. Others were worried that engaging in a hobby like cycling would incite promiscuous behavior. Considering how uptight the Victorians could be, the very fact that a woman was straddling a bicycle at all was seen as very inappropriate. This was a slippery slope towards poor morals and sexual corruption, something that young women should be protected from at all cost. And finally, one of the biggest concerns was that cycling was just dangerous for women. Many feared that operating a bicycle was far too complicated. Women who cycled were often depicted as incompetent, unable to control their vehicle, and getting hurt or injuring others. It was much like the modern stereotype that women are bad drivers, despite the fact that according to the numbers, it's actually quite the opposite. But falling off a bicycle was not the worst fate that a lady cyclist faced. Some doctors justified their hatred towards cycling by claiming that it was the cause of several medical conditions, like infertility, anxiety, and heart palpitations. One of the most well-known of these was bicycle face, a state of tension that would leave you looking sickly and tired due to the mental strain that riding a bicycle supposedly caused a woman's fragile brain. Of course, this was all nonsense, but the idea that exercise was actually bad for women's health would remain prevalent for a long time. However, eventually, even Victorian doctors couldn't deny the facts. The bicycle had changed women's lives for the better. Honestly, its impact really can't be understated. It changed fashion, improved women's health, and gave them an unprecedented amount of independence. So the next time you're riding a bike, just remember, you have a lot of history riding along with you. Hey everyone, thank you for watching! If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like or a comment down below. If you want to see more content like this, you can also subscribe to my channel, and keep up to date on all the fun history videos of the future. But for now, I bid you farewell.